I'm Addison Smith with Campus Reform. Today, we have the pleasure of sitting down and talking to Mr. Christopher Dodson. Mr. Dodson is the Executive Director and General Counsel for the North Dakota Catholic Conference, which is the public policy voice of the Catholic bishops of North Dakota. Mr. Dodson received his bachelor's degree from the University of California at Riverside and his law degree from UC Berkeley. He converted to the Catholic Church during his law school tenure. Most recently, Mr. Dodson wrote a letter to parents of, I believe when we were talking, Mr. Dodson, you clarified that it was Catholic high school parents in North Dakota, warning them of the school's UND's proposed gender inclusion policy, which would require campus-wide use of preferred pronouns, accepting and affirming, quote, expressed gender identity, and basing housing on said identity rather than on one's biological sex. Mr. Dodson, I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to dive right into the context of this letter. In the letter, you address your grievances with the UND's gender inclusion policy proposal for a number of reasons, including citing that it's a violation of students' free speech and religious rights. How could the UND proposal, in your view, violate those rights?
The proposal, which we heard about in October of last year, is rather broad. It goes beyond just the administration recognizing someone's changed sex or gender pronouns for administrative purposes, but requires faculty, staff, and students, and even campus visitors to use someone's preferred pronoun and affirm their expressed gender identity. It goes so far as requiring that for religious student organizations. It expressly excluded fraternities and sororities, but said not other student organizations under the policy. It affected also communications, such as signage, so that all signage on campus had to be, could not assume a gender binary. So that would affect, for example, if someone wanted to a recognized student club wanted to have a Bible study for men and insisted that it be biological men at the Bible study. So we laid out in a letter in October what our concerns were, that this went beyond what was allowed under the Constitution and state law, we thought. And then months passed and we never heard anything from the university. So the bishops decided that this winter, parents at the Catholic high schools should know that this is a possibility as they're making decisions about whether to send their child or soon to be adult in the fall, that they should know that this policy might be adopted at the University of North Dakota, which is, by the way, the only campus of the 11 state campuses which appears to be pursuing this policy.
And I want to focus on another aspect of the proposal. Obviously, it's a violation of, like you said, students' free speech rights. It's compelling speech and prohibiting certain types of speech. But another thing that it's doing in that you describe in the letter is that it would decide housing. Students would be housed based on their purported gender identity rather than their biological sex. And this is unfortunately a trend that we've seen a lot here at the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform and around the country. Men being allowed in women's restrooms, men being allowed in women's locker rooms, men being allowed in women's sports, and now we're seeing men or women being allowed in men or women's housing, all depending on their gender identity and not what they biologically are. In Loudoun County, Virginia, we've seen just how dangerous these kinds of policies can be to women. There was a great scandal there with the whole restroom ordeal. So obviously, this is a cause for concern among parents. The question I have for you is, how should parents be pushing back against this?
Well, I think what we need now is clarification from the university. The original proposal basically said this. It said students will be assigned according to their expressed gender rather than a biological sex. But elsewhere in the policy, it says that a student cannot inquire about someone's true biological sex because that would be a form of discrimination. we read that and couldn't figure out any other way it could avoid the situation where someone could be assigned someone. If you don't pre-arrange a roommate, you could be assigned a roommate of the opposite biological sex, and you wouldn't have a way to know about it. Now, the university has said since then, they said last week in response to these concerns, that won't happen. We'll make sure it doesn't happen. And there are other parts of the housing policy which make sure that wouldn't happen. But what we're not clear on is why it wouldn't happen, because the university seems to also be relying on the fact that students will never be housed with somebody they don't want to be housed with, and can request a different roommate, and they can request an exemption from the first year on-campus housing requirement. Well, you shouldn't have to rely on asking for one of those exemptions. So I think we need clarification. Are they ever going to assign someone of the opposite biological sex in their housing situations? Parents need to, well, parents and students should know that that's going to be clarified, that would not happen, because this is a state university.
Right. And one thing that I've found interesting and that's been pointed out before is these schools, the culture at large seems to go so far out of their way to satisfy and to accommodate this very small fringe group of students or of people who have this, purported gender identity, whether they're transgender or say they're non-binary and so on, at the expense of the vast majority of students who have a regular gender identity, a binary identity, that are a biological man or a woman. You write to the parents that this progressive ideology fundamentally contradicts Catholic teachings, but it seems to even contradict fundamental truths about our humanity. It flies in the face of basic biology, and it goes against what we've understood about ourselves for all of human history. Needless to say, transgender identity is as I touched on, such a small fraction of the population. Why do you think so many colleges, institutions, and the culture writ large are going to such great lengths to mainstream this and affirm it?
I really cannot explain or discuss why UND in particular did this, University of North Dakota. But we know it's a trend nationally. And it goes into various theological reasons and so on. How we've got ourselves in this situation. But what happens is, not only have we detached some truths here, but there's an agenda that's taken over. It says, well, we have to do something. The university said it had to do something, but they didn't. They haven't pointed to, in our mind, justification under any state law or federal rule that says they have to do this. And if it was true, again, the 10 other campuses would be doing it. They didn't need to go this far. Look, creating a safe environment for learning, free of harassment, that's the job of every university. But imposing a particular ideology upon the students is not the role of the state.
Yeah. In closing, I want to ask you, as far as the end result, let's say that 5-10 years down the road, this trend keeps going, and these policy proposals like the one at UND do become part of the norm, and colleges around the country begin to practice this. What result do you think could come of this?
Well, I think we're going to see, some parents say, look, it's not worth the lower tuition to send to a public university. But I also think we'll see legislative action. There's already legislators talking about prohibiting this policy at UND, or using the purse strings to prohibit it. We did that in North Dakota with regards to Planned Parenthood being on one of the campuses, eventually saying, you're going to lose funding if you do any partnership with Planned Parenthood, and the legislature pushed that through. I think this type of legislators are getting fed up with they consider a certain ideology being imposed on the campuses.
Well, I guess we'll see just how that plays out over time. Mr. Christopher Dodson from the North Dakota Catholic Conference, I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Thank you.